The truth is that kitchen knives are perhaps 25% of the knives used in most of the terrible crimes. I do think there is areas of innovation that we can do with kitchen knives. I hate to say it, not all kitchen knives need to have a point on them.
Gothix. I love this video because it's a perfect articulation of why assault weapon bans are stupid. As you guys know, despite how vocal I am on certain topics, I actually hate talking politics because I'd rather get to the root of an issue instead of playing political ping pong year after year. And with anti-Second Amendment bills, it's no different. Like clockwork, a school gets shot up, the media sensationalizes it, prompting angry activists to demand stricter gun policy, all while our elected overlords ride the coattails of deadly shootings to push for their stupid laws. Not because they actually care about ending gun violence, but because it's politically advantageous of them to pretend to care. What happens when guns get outlawed or become harder to access? Do you think raging lunatics who want to inflict harm on innocent people are gonna suddenly have a change of heart? All they're gonna do is get creative, so what then? Should we ban house knives to stop mass stabbings? Or what about cars when someone is killed by a drunk driver, or someone decides to plow through a crowd of innocent people? This is exactly what I mean when I say I'm exhausted with political debates, because most people would rather sidestep the real issue, like our lovely Rhode Island Governor Dan McKee, who magically snuck an assault weapons ban into the state budget. Yes, you heard that right. The state budget. In a hilarious press release, McKee asserts that an assault weapons ban would help promote the health and wellness of Rhode Islanders. Yes, the same man who seemingly supports eugenics and child sterilization wants to ensure your health and wellness because that makes perfect sense. What drives me crazy about anti-gun bans such as this is the fact that the main argument tends to get lost as we waste our time debating definitions, cherry-pick data, or the correct interpretation of the Constitution. As I said earlier, we're sidestepping the real issue. People like Governor Dan McKee seem to think that criminals can be stopped by passing a law, knowing damn well that criminals aren't typically known for obeying laws. But then again, what do I know? Listen, I can sympathize with someone who's lost a loved one to gun violence, but there has to be a way that we can address the sinful and fallen nature of mankind without restricting the rights of responsible and lawful gun owners like myself. Now, because I am fairly new to the 2A community, I thought it would be cool to let someone who's way more knowledgeable on this topic explain exactly what is wrong with this bill, which by the way was hundreds of pages long, and why it should not only concern Rhode Islanders, but citizens of other states who may follow suit with similar bills. This is a little bit of a longer video, but I promise you that regardless of what side of the gun debate you're on, this is an interview that you do not want to miss. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dan Kiesler from Parabellum Provisions, and we are here at the Range, Rhode Island. And we're here to talk about this bill that Governor Dan McKee wants to push. So before we get into it, tell me briefly, who are you, what do you do, and why are you here?
Sure. I am one of the directors with Parabellum Provisions. I'm also a former board member with the Federated Rhode Island Sportsman's Club. I was a prior lobbyist with the Rhode Island Revolver and Rifle. I am a USCCA certified instructor and NRA instructor, and also a member of a group called the Community Instructors of Rhode Island, of which you guys have taken a couple of our classes, where our mission is to try and reach into audiences that typically are underserved by the Second Amendment community, trying to dispel we're a bunch of old white farmer guys, those types of things, and a lifelong supporter of our individual right to keep and bear arms.
So we're just gonna jump right into it, okay? So I have some questions prepared for you.
Sure.
Why do you think that this was tied to the budget bill, this assault weapons ban? And does it change how people should view it?
The reason that it was tied to the budget is they've been trying to pass this legislation for several years. It has come up in both the House and the Senate for 6 or 7 years in a row, and they've been unable to get our legislature to pass. In Rhode Island, a bill has to pass both the House and the Senate, and the bill has to be the same. So the language of the bill in the House and the language of the bill in the Senate have to match. Both chambers have to pass the legislation on the floor before it can go to the governor and be signed into law. They haven't been able to get that done over the past several years. The governor of the state decided that he would include it into the state's fiscal budget. The reasoning behind that was, if it can't get through the House and chamber, we have to pass our state's budget because it's the operating expenses that fund everything.
Right.
Infrastructure, the government organizations. So the budget has to pass. So it was placed in the budget kind of as a fail-safe. It's criminal legislation that's included as part of a fiscal budget for a state. Criminal legislation typically needs to be passed in the House and Senate because there is public testimony allowed. So our elected representatives get feedback from us and are allowed to make their decisions informed based on their constituents. And when it goes through the budget, that doesn't happen.
Right.
They don't have to do that.
This bill targets certain semi-automatic firearms with specific features. Do you think that the definitions of assault weapons in this legislation is clear and fair, or does it overreach into commonly owned firearms?
That's a legitimate question because assault is an action taken by a human being. A firearm is a tool and an inanimate object.
Yeah.
Right? So how does a weapon assault anything? It's a political term that did not come into existence until 1989. So it's become commonplace now. People typically think of assault weapons as firearms that look like military firearms. The way that it's defined in this legislation in all three versions, right now, all three versions, the House version, the Senate version, and the version that's in the budget have slightly different wording in defining what they term an assault weapon. All three of them include firearms that are not only commonly owned in the state, but they also include heirloom firearms. People that collect military firearms that their grandfathers used in World War I, World War II are defined as assault weapons. We could walk out, if you wanted to, later in the store, and I could point out some features on some on the wall would be banned by this. This is your standard, very, very old lever action rifle like you see in cowboy movies. It's been around forever and ever and ever and ever. This shroud is what you hold so that when you fire the gun, your hand doesn't get burnt by the barrel.
Yeah.
Just by adding that piece to this rifle, that makes this an assault weapon. This is a stock that is adjustable. You can see that it moves. Now, the purpose of this is if you have a shorter arm reach, you can then adjust that stock so that it reaches you so that you can safely fire it. But because this adjusts, our legislators think that makes this more deadly than if it didn't adjust. This is a Beretta 92. This has a device on it that's threaded. This is a handgun that there's thousands of owned by thousands of people in the state. Because it has this threaded device on the barrel, this is an assault weapon under that legislation. So that's a good example of how a commonly owned firearm now makes you a felon if you have it in your closet. There was a list put out by Federated Rhode Island Sportsman's Club this week. You can find that on their Facebook channel. That lists over 3,000 commonly owned firearms that will be banned by this legislation as worded currently. The interesting thing about having a feature definition involved in criminal legislation that would take away our rights in commonly owned firearms is we don't have any statistics from any organization that ties a firearm feature to crime or to an increase in crime at all.
Let me pivot, because there's a question that sort of leads into this. Supporters say that this ban could make the streets safer by cutting down on gun violence. What's your take on that?
So the proponents say that it would make the streets safer. My response to that would be how? Because the ban targets law-abiding firearms owners. If we can all agree, and I think we can, criminals don't follow laws.
This is my logical thought, yes.
Criminals do not obey laws. So they want to pass a law that bans the sale, the possession of the features, the types of firearms that they describe as assault weapons. The only people that are targeted by that are the ones that own it. And there's an estimated 14.8, according to the AFL-CIO's poll that came out last week in the Providence Journal, that of people that own firearms in this state, and all of them own arms that would be banned by this. Will it make the streets safer? I don't think so, because criminals aren't going to give up their firearms.
Right.
And even if we ban them in these states, none of the statistics that have been provided by the state or any of the anti-organizations actually tie that the criminals are getting their firearms from law-abiding firearms owners.
Right.
So the real question becomes, how do we keep firearms out of the hands of criminals? The way the laws are written, they don't target criminals. They target law-abiding firearms owners, and passing these laws will do nothing to make the streets safer. I don't know any criminals that are going to read the law and come turn.
They don't care.
Yeah, they're not going to come turn in their firearm. While we're on this subject, Parabellum's just released a very extensive report on the Attorney General's 2023 gun crimes report. We went through his report and the supporting data that was supplied by the Attorney General's office with the support. And we looked at the types of crimes, the types of firearms used, all the data that was called out in his report. And on a line-by-line basis, we looked at his data and we looked at what was presented in the report, and we tried to point out what the data said versus what was in the report. And I highly encourage people to go to our site, Parabellum, and look at this data. It's very telling on things like what types of firearms are used in crimes in Rhode Island. It's also very telling on what types of crimes firearms are used in, how are those prosecuted, how many charges are dismissed, what types of crimes have charges dismissed. And when we look at those statistics relative to this state, what we see very clearly is we are not putting people who commit crimes with firearms in jail. That's not to say they're not being convicted of a crime.
Right.
That they're not becoming felons. Most of them were already felons before they did this. According to the data we looked at, 55% of the people that went through the system in 2023 had some type of other charges that did not involve divorce court or traffic court, because we all have traffic problems and get divorces. But 55% had other cases, and a huge percentage of them had prior warrants. The number one largest amount of crime that occurs in this state year over year is in Providence. If we took the crime stats from Providence out of this state, it would be negligible.
Now, would I be correct in saying that this bill would actually put innocent people in jeopardy, because at that point, the only people who would own firearms would be the criminals?
That's a very, very valid statement. We're estimating that around 90% of firearms that are commonly owned in this state will become illegal, and everyone that owns them when this is signed into law will instantly be a felon. There's no statistics that point to lawful firearm owners committing the crimes, so I don't believe this law will do anything to actually make the streets safe.
What would you recommend without infringing on the rights of Rhode Islanders?
So this,
or Americans in general?
I could get myself in trouble with some of the firearms community when I answer this, but I'm going to be honest with you, and these are my views. The firearms community hasn't been invited to be a part of designing this legislation. So if you notice throughout the year, the Moms Demand Action and the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence, they've been up at the State House 12, 13 times during the year, lobbying our legislators. These are professional paid lobbyists that are funded by very, very well-funded organizations. The movement in Rhode Island is grassroots, driven by community organizations that are funded by citizens of this state. And the national organizations come and help us out only when these bills get put on the table, but they're not pouring money into these local organizations like Parabellum or the Rhode Island Second Amendment Coalition or the Rhode Island Firearm Owners League, all organizations that work diligently to support our rights here. What could be done is invite us to the table and let's talk about where and how criminals are getting their firearms. There's some room to work there that doesn't require taking firearms away from those who are neither inclined or intent on committing crimes. And there would need to be some study, because those statistics aren't readily available for this state. Where are they getting their firearms? How are they acquiring them? Are they coming in from out of state? They like to throw around the term ghost gun. Ghost guns is a dangerous term. The tradition of building firearms and modifying firearms at home is as old as this nation. The men and women that were called up to fight the American Revolution were required to bring their own firearms. Some were homemade, some weren't. It's a tradition we've carried throughout years. You can't really 3D print a firearm. You can only 3D print the case. The internal components still have to be purchased and bought. So how do they acquire the components for it?
Aside from just like your everyday gun owner, who else would be affected by this?
Oh, that's a great question. So owners of shops exactly like this one, anybody that owns a range, anybody that owns a business that manufactures parts for firearms, like Roscoe Manufacturing right over in Central Falls, Ocean State, Tactical does customization of firearms. All of these people will be affected. Some will have to go out of business because if you look around and you consider the number of firearms this will ban, they won't be available to sell them here.
Even also, I would think competitive shooters too.
Competitive shooters too. If they have rifles that have any of the features
Yeah.
that they're banning, it will affect the competition shooters. So think about the families, the businesses that will lose business. I know of people that have extensive collections of firearms that are valued of $60,000, $70,000 in their firearm collections because they hunt, they are instructors, they teach, they're used for examples and demonstration in classes. They collect them for collecting, they build and modify them for building and modifying, and they're just collecting, they're not breaking any laws. They pass these laws. The value of the collections drops drastically because now they're not worth as much on the market, and we're forced to sell. Everybody in the state would be forced to sell. The rest of the country knows they're forced to sell, so they're not going to pay the full market value for them. In that aspect, the government is taking money from people that own firearms.
How do you think that this ban would affect the balance between individual rights and public safety, especially for people who don't own guns but care about both issues?
I think the level that the rhetoric has gotten to online, if you look at, I'm going to use the terms right-leaning groups and left-leaning groups, the rhetoric has gotten so ugly that people aren't able to have a conversation because they hear words that have them throw up walls.
Yes.
And it happens on both sides.
Oh, yeah.
On both sides, without a question. These pieces of legislation would have been passed years ago if we did not have a large number of Democrats in this state that were also gun owners, because this is a blue state. You know, it's run by the Democratic Party. So when you have someone that is a staunch advocate for the Second Amendment, and this is a for instance, they come up and they start going, my constitutional rights are being violated, and they push that narrative. People get tired of hearing that narrative, and that throws up walls because they are concerned with the safety. On the other hand, some of the safety concerns that get put out there are also conflated, and I'll give you a for instance. Two of the major arguments that the anti-gun lobbies bring to the table are that for suicides, the largest number of suicides are committed with firearms. That's true. They have statistics on the number of suicides that have people that have firearms in the house, how much more likely they are to use a firearm in suicide. I don't dispute those statistics. I think they're valid. However, when you try to tie that into banning firearms that have certain features and accessories will prevent suicides in the home.
It doesn't make any sense.
It does. I can't make that make sense.
Yeah.
The other argument is that by banning assault weapons, that the number of firearms will go down and therefore we'll have less on the street. Again, these bans ban features. And by banning those features, they take out the vast majority of current privately owned firearms. They do nothing to take firearms out of the hands of criminals. So it can't possibly make the streets safer. There is a huge majority of gun owners that are not Republican or independent, and that's what's kept them from being passed. For people that don't own firearms, that care about it, they should care about, you know, their grandfather's World War II firearm they have in their closet that they've been keeping as a keepsake. I want to use a case that's actually currently in the courts in Rhode Island. There was an elderly woman, whose home was broken into. The police were called. They came into her home, took care of the bad guys, found a firearm in her home that she had had for years, that had a magazine that had a capacity over what is currently the little. She was arrested and charged with a crime because her home got broken into. Think about the people that are sitting with these heirloom firearms or ones that were handed down through their family that have one of these features that are called out in this legislation sitting in their closet that don't know, and God forbid they have an emergency in their home. Someone sees it or finds out it's there, and now they're charged with a felony because they own an assault weapon.
Wow, that's crazy. So if you care about grandma, you better pay attention. That's nuts. All right, let's hit these other two questions. What strategies do you think the 2A community should prioritize to influence this legislation? I know you talked about having all of these other organizations put money locally into small groups. Do you have any other recommendations that we could do?
Boy, do I. First off, I want to give a shout out to the other organizations, and forgive me if I don't get them all, but the Federated Rhode Island Sportsman's Club, the Rhode Island Rifle and Revolver Association, Rhode Island Firearm Owners League, Rhode Island Second Amendment PAC, the Rhode Island Second Amendment Coalition. These organizations right now are all currently working very hard to try and get actual information into the public realm. And we typically only reach the audiences from our YouTube channels and our website. So it's hard to breach that gap between the last question, those folks that may not be involved in the community that this should also concern, but they're out there working on that. And that's why I'm grateful for this interview today, because I think we'll maybe get the message out to some folks that don't necessarily hear it. So everybody's working together to do this right now. If these bills get passed, they're going to be passed because we have a majority in our legislature that are Democrats. I'm not making this an argument about Democrats or non-Democrats. I'm saying that it would be passed by people that are more left of center that are in our legislature. One of the other things that is going around right now, and I don't know if you can see this, but let me put this up there so people can see the QR code. There is a campaign to ask people, we're trying to make this statewide, to disaffiliate politically. So the idea being behind the disaffiliation campaign is we go to our legislatures and we say, we believe that these firearm laws will be overturned by the Supreme Court, and they will be within the next 4 years. You have a very far-leaning right-side Supreme Court. We have a new ATF director. We have a new Director of National Intelligence. We had the whole new DOJ, the entire top brass is all very pro-2A. So we're thinking in Rhode Island that if we pressure folks to understand that it's not just that you're infringing on a Second Amendment birthright, but you're also making criminals out of people that have never done anything wrong, aren't inclined to do anything wrong, don't have any intent to do anything wrong. Go disaffiliate from your party, become an independent, and vote in the Democratic primaries. And for people that support this legislation that criminalizes a whole large number of people in the state, primary them out in the next round of elections.
I'm also unaffiliated. I say I'm politically homeless.
Politically homeless. I like that.
For someone who doesn't own a gun, what's the one thing about this bill you want them to think about? And why does this bill matter to them? Like, why should I care? I don't own a gun.
That's a good question that can also be approached from many perspectives. If we agree in general that we have the right to keep and bear arms and that is enshrined in our Constitution and our laws as a birthright for law-abiding citizens in this country, and we allow our legislatures to pass a law that takes away or infringes on that right, the thing that concerns them is which one of our rights, which one of our amendments do they believe in that they will infringe on next? If we allow them to infringe there, I understand that there are a large number of people that never have had a firearm. They don't have a desire to, they don't want to, and that's okay. We're absolutely not saying you have to own one. That's okay. We're just that it's a right that is protected just like many other, and if we allow our government to infringe on this one, what's gonna stop them from infringing on another one?
Okay, so we're gonna put all the links in the description. I'll put that QR code up on the screen if you guys wanna check it out. Also, a call to action to everyone watching this. If you're not in Rhode Island, is there anything that they could do?
If they're not from Rhode Island, share and like this video, get it out there and let folks know what our legislature is doing. You know, they're trying to put a piece of criminal legislation into our state's budget. They're also doing the proper process of going through the House and Senate, and we'll be there in number to debate that with them in person. But let the rest of the public know what they're doing here so that they can become aware. It's hard to reach all the people that don't normally look at these circles and these types of issues. And check out our Facebook page, Parabellum Provisions, and our website, parabellumprovisions.org. And thank you. I know you'll link everything.
I actually, when you were saying this, I forgot to mention, you guys offer classes.
We do.
Okay.
So Parabellum, part of our mission is to reach into underserved communities that don't get education on firearms. We believe because it's a right, it also carries a responsibility to know how to safely use and store them. And so we help other organizations by providing instructors and RSOs and do classes all over the state. I would love to get Providence folks that live there that are interested in learning about firearm safety, firearm storage, and most importantly, the things that we teach is you don't ever want to have to use a firearm. It's not something we teach people how to go be Billy Badass, if I can say that. we want you to know that we never want you to use it. Avoidance of a situation where it's called for is always the top priority. But we try to teach this and reach the underserved communities and get that message out. If you guys are interested in classes for first-time shooters or advanced classes, we don't do any of the heavy tactical stuff, but we know the guys here at the range and other clubs that do teach that. We can lead you to it. If you want to get in the door, learn the very basics and stuff, go to our Facebook page. We list every class taught in this state for every organization, every range that publicly posts them. If you go to our events page, you can find them. And there's some months, there's 180 classes a month available in Rhode Island for people that are interested in firearms classes.
Nice. Okay. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please, like I said, hit the like and subscribe button. Share it with a bunch of people. If you're from Rhode Island, get involved. Stop waiting till the last minute to do something.
Yes, please. And if I may, watch Facebook, watch the Federated Rhode Island Sportsman's Club for announcements, because we will be announcing when we're gathering at the State House to go talk to our legislators, and we'll be announcing when we're rallying.
And also special thanks to the Range RI for hosting this interview. Go check them out. Link is in the description.